The bit of market research. How many people? Usually with Dendra, rarely are people. They really love it, or they find it a bit spooky. Who really loved it?
I love it.
Only got you, yeah. Did the other people find it dark and spooky and?
I like it.
Yeah, because I did when I first came in here. It was really heavy and all of that, and other people really resonate to it. But there may be a good reason for that. One, why it's as dark as it is, because of what it is. Hathor is one of the chief manifestations of the great cosmic feminine. She's all of the roles of the feminine wrapped into one, and a couple of the other goddesses have similar qualities, but not to the same with the same intensity and so on. So Hathor is at once the goddess or the goddess of celebration, and here of the new year. She's the mistress of the cycles of time, so associated with procession and all of that. She's associated with sexuality and all of its many aspects.
This is very important because it builds the whole temple and what's going to come next.
And she's associated with music, with revelry, all of these things. There's a wonderful poem, the late poem, where Hathor is sort of reciting her own qualities, and there's an interesting line at the end of it, which, if only enough people had paid attention to it, the history might not have been what it was. He's talking about her. It starts off with "I am the golden one," and then she cites off her various roles and qualities. And at the end, toward the end of it, she says, "And when young men lust after beautiful young women, it's because they love me." This is a big difference from anything that we have around today. And if enough people had paid attention to that aspect of it, the chances are that Western history would not have been the bloodbath that it's been for the last 2,000 years. A great line. Anyhow, here she is principally important in her role of mistress of the cycles of time. So the aisles above your head as you walked in, I don't know if you noticed, the ceiling was all restored, and with a little bit left on one side so you could see what it was when they didn't restore it, because people were in here. It was up to the gunnels, up to the capitals when Napoleon came through, with people living in the inside and having their campfires and so on inside. So but it's here that the New Year itself was celebrated in June, I think it is, or July. Oh, it was in July. And there's an interesting story about the battles, scholarly battles that were raging around the time of the 1830s and so on. And also you notice, you haven't seen that much of Egypt, but you have, you've been to Abydos, and you've been to Luxor, and you know that the gods are, there are statues of the gods, but never are they depicted in sculpture, in relief work. There are statues that are, of course, three-dimensional, but in relief work, they're always shown in profile. Only Hathor has this strange triangular head with the cow's ears, and I always used to wonder about that. And as I said, here's the New Year, and on one of my earlier trips, I was talking about a place sort of spooking me out a bit, and one of the women said, "Oh, well, yeah, but because it's here, the New Year, here the New Year is born, so it's really a womb." And I said, "Oh, well, yeah, that accounts for why it's so dark, and why a lot of people, some people kind of find it spooky and others find it comforting." In my own case, I think my mother was in labor for something like 48 hours. Either she didn't want to let me out, or I didn't want to get out, one or the other, but it obviously was a fairly traumatic, what do you call it, pre something like experience. What?
Prepartum?
Something like that. There's a word for it. Prenatal, I think, maybe. Anyway, so that was really interesting, but it still didn't explain that strange flat face, which doesn't look Egyptian, with the high cheekbones and the cow ears, is associated with the cow, the divine cow, as the source of cosmic nourishment. That makes perfect sense. But there was a lot that was missing. And then when we were inside, and I've been talking about this with my group about 7 or 8 years ago, and I'll show you when we get into it, a particular set of Hathor sculpted, faces that are almost undamaged. Here you see they've been absolutely erased. And if you notice in the inside there, the whole temple, compared to Abydos, it's been wholesale effaced, with in some cases very little left uneffaced. But when you look at it, you see that it has to have been selective, and this is where the academics come to the fore. On the inside here, on the far, on that side, high up, everything's effaced except for a few registers at the very top. And the usual explanation is that, well, it was too high to reach, but it wasn't too high to reach on the other side. It wasn't too high to reach anywhere else. This is an idea that should have occurred to someone somewhere along the line. Or maybe the Effacers Union got pissed off because they weren't getting a raise, and they just stopped work at a certain point. I don't know. But anyhow, one of the women looked at that face and said, "Oh well."
She was a doctor.
No, she wasn't a doctor, but she was the mother of triplets.
And was doctor.
No, she wasn't a doctor. Anyway, she said, "John, well, that figure, that triangle, is a uterus, and the cow's ears are the ovaries." And then, sure enough, not really registered. And then another woman, who was on a subsequent trip, said, "Yeah, but it's a pregnant uterus." And I did a little bit of research and got a book on Egyptian medicine, and found medical accounts of Egyptian, the Egyptian depiction of the uterus and so on. And it's funny because when you look at a schematic of an unpregnant uterus, or a cow's skull, it looks exactly like a cow's skull, but when in pregnancy it becomes, much exaggerated. And then I realized, or someone pointed out to me, I don't remember, that very often when you see the cow's ears, you look in and there's a little egg inside the ears. So formal. And this was, in my opinion, a major discovery. That adds a lot to understanding of Egypt and how they went about things. And then I did some more research and found that this had been thought of earlier. In the 50s, there was an expert on ancient talismans who talked about uterine symbolism in the ancient world. Everybody was doing this, apparently, and nobody paid any attention. And in Egypt either. This is a big aid to understanding. And then, sure enough, one of the academic forums a few years back, someone was giving a talk on Hathor as uterus. I didn't get a copy of the talk actually, but we were there well ahead of her. But that, in my opinion, that was a fairly major addition to our understanding of how Egypt went about things. You could call it sacred physiology, actually. And there's a friend of mine, who was on one of my trips, who's about to publish a substantial book on the relationship between physiological features. For example, this one is pretty well established already, the eye of Horus that actually looks like the pineal gland. And there are a whole lot of other things in which features that otherwise, we sort of know what they mean in Egypt, but nobody's connected them to the physiological piece of the human anatomy that it's taken from. And there's a lot. So very interesting. It's one of the fairly major development coming up pretty soon. So anyway, what else? Did I mention about the scoop marks?
Not inside, when
What?
we see them, when we see
Well, we
them.
go inside. When the temple fell into disuse, and the Egyptian religion died, among the locals it was still a power place. And as I said, this was a healing temple, as were all goddess temples. And the locals, obviously, thought that they scooped like holy water in the church, so these is the holy stones, and they'd scoop it out presumably with a spoon. What they would then do with it, I don't know. I hope they didn't brush their teeth with it. But anyway, and certain of the columns obviously had a reputation for being more potent than others, because a few of them are really scooped deep and others are left kind of untouched. So shall we go through?
No,
and
1 minute. This
What?
temple, by the way, is one of the much later temples. Like it started by a later Ptolemy and stopped. Then a few Roman emperors took seat of the government or ruling. Then a later Roman started and ended it. This is the end of it, the last part of it. So it's AD. It's what? It's like 50 or 60 AD. It ended up this way. And of course you saw the art style, how crude it is. And we will point you at the knocking off some of the scenes. But this temple, you can see the ground goes down and it slowly goes up where the sides are wide, then they go narrower. You see that inside. The ceiling goes down. It's like an exercise of the horizons meet. This is very much an exercise of the Egyptian temples. They do that, And of course it's of different levels, and the most important or the most sacred part is the sanctuary, as all. Yalla.
No. So, the ceilings here are amount to a kind of symbolic planetarium that incorporates the constellation or the zodiacal sky, the solar sky with the phases of with the sun, the months. The sun, 36 weeks of the year. The Egyptian week was 10 days each, with the 5 days at the end for when the gods were born. In other words, a 360, 365 relationship. And a third one that is the phases of the moon. So it's really a total symbolic, not an actual representation of the heavens. And here, this is zodiacal, and you can pick out, ours are better than mine, you can pick out 6 of the signs of the zodiac. What's right above my head is Leo, and it goes down, Scorpio is pretty obvious.
Scorpio.
Anyway, you see them all, and the others are constellations.
John, there is Tauret standing there. Tauret.
Ah, right.
It's the pole star.
And strangely enough, even before the hieroglyphs were translated at all or translatable at all, the scholars knew a fair amount about the astronomy, because this is in the Greek period, and they knew about Greek astronomy, and of course they read Greek fluently as their own languages, so they were able to understand the significance, the astronomical significance of these isles way before anybody could translate the text. Anyway,
This
and now
was
you
all
see,
black and look,
yeah, you see, this isn't done in the last few years when it was, the Italians taught them that they had to use a different solvent for different kinds of cleaning. So this gets back to something close to its original. I suspect it was a lot more brilliant. The blues were more brilliant, and probably the figures were probably golden, I would think, I'll bet. Anyway, it's a big difference from what it looked like a few years ago. And in fact, in the central aisle, where they have on one side the alternating vultures and sun discs, male and female principles, vulture female, solar disk male, and one half of them they cleaned up and restored, and the other half they left as they were, which gives you a good idea what the whole temple was like.
The temples were lived in, and they
Well,
cooked
it's cooked in, and they
laundry and all.
Right.
And here you see the arbitration and the disfiguring of all.
You see
Totally.
They're very careful. I mean, they
Exactly.
spent more care effacing the figures than they did drawing the figures. But the drawing was pretty terrible, but the effacing is very careful.
But they left the cartouches, so this can be detected. What Roman emperor, which one?
Well, for what purpose? You see very often the headdresses are left intact, but the figures are faced, and you turn around the other way, you see that the bottom wedges or two top ones are completely left alone. So these are the ones that were too high for them to reach, but
they did that.
So it's really funny. Anyway, let's go over to the other aisle because there's an interesting historical lesson involved.
Huge columns.
Hey Zoe,
What?
how would you like to volunteer for carrying money? See, that's sweet. Thank you for volunteering.
She was voluntold.
What?
She was voluntold.
Okay, you see, directly overhead is Nut, the sky, shown as a very elongated woman. You see there are her feet, and there you have the sun raying down on what is representation of the facade of the temple, quite clumsily done. But you see where in her dress, you see that her dress is made up of water, actually the waves of water, which is effectively energy.
Yes.
And she's kicking off, seems to be kicking off a scarab beetle. Now when the early Egyptologists, the astronomer Egyptologists were looking at this, they were trying to interpret why Nut seemed to be kicking off the cycle. The scarab beetle actually was an early sign for cancer, the age of cancer. So they were interpreting it as the Egyptians telling themselves or commemorating to themselves, not to the world, they didn't care about the rest of the world, commemorating to themselves the birth of their civilization under the age of cancer, which would be between 8 and 6,000 BC. So it was not Gemini. Between 10 and 8,000 maybe. Anyhow, at that time, it was taken as a given. We're talking about 1820, 1830. It was taken as a given that the creationist account of Genesis was factually correct, and that God created the world in 6 days. Screwed it all up by taking off on the 7th when he should have been working on fixing all the stuff that was wrong. And that this all started at 4004 BC by counting up the lifelines given in the incredibly tedious book of Numbers, where it says Jesse begat Joan and Joan begat blah 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 and so forth and so on, which gave you 4004 BC. So this started up an unbelievable fury of attacks and counterattacks in the leading intellectual papers of the time, and chief among was probably the Times of London. And this went on and on and on and on and on, pretty much until it ran out of steam around 1860, when Darwin published his Origin of Species. But really, I think it was pretty easy to explain it. I don't know, maybe somebody did in that wealth of back of to and fro argument, because the Egyptians celebrated their New Year in the sign of Cancer in July, and so and here the New Year is celebrated, that they knew. So it's very simple. What that's representing is the kicking off nothing to do with the kicking off the New Year, and nothing to do with the origins of Egyptian civilization. What interesting historical story that, come to think of it, maybe I will do a bit more research and see if anything juicy comes up for a book I'm intending to do. Is sort of inspired by, you know, the Oxford Press has a whole bunch of, like the Oxford book of Scottish literature, and the Oxford Companion to this and the Oxford Companion to that, to do a kind of traveler's key companion to the updated guidebook, which will incorporate all kinds of oddball stories and weird things about Egypt and the curse of Ammon and stuff that there's no room for in the guidebook, but is really interesting. A lot of it, in fact, very informative, and a lot of it very entertaining, and it could be a very interesting volume. The guidebook can only incorporate so much, but as a companion piece, it could be fun plain reading for anybody coming to Egypt, or for anybody, period. Anyway, that sort of thing. So let's continue. Anyway, here's the rest of the zodiac here. And there's nothing particularly intelligible to say. Here again, the faces are thoroughly effaced, and you don't get a sense of how she actually looked. We'll see a couple of minutes from now. We'll Hathor, more on Hathor head. Interesting bit of Egyptology here. When I was doing my research for the guidebook, I was coming here with a friend of mine who was a photographer and doing photographing for me, and we were doing Dendera, which has been in when 80s somewhere, yeah, and not very few grottos, and we were on the outside, and there was a guy on a scaffold carefully copying a very long text written into the walls. And we said hello and asked him who he was. And it turned out that he was the Egyptologist Francois Domas, who, as I said, was one of the good guys. He was really pretty clued in. And I told him that I was doing research in the book for, I'm not sure if I was doing the guidebook or the sermon. Anyway, he got very interested because he had been working when Shwala was here, and apparently he was pretty good friends with him, but never kind of came out of it. I think he was kind of a closet symbolist, but he never came out of the closet. But when I was asking him, because I was trying to develop this theory of selective effacement, and he glommed right onto that because he was pointing out on this long text of hundreds of letters that certain figures were characteristically effaced and nothing else was. And it was obvious that this was deliberate. The set animal, when it appeared, was effaced. And we'll get to more on this when we get to Edfu, when sort of the bad guys who are shown captured as captured enemies, or enemies or subdued enemies, when they are effaced, it's a double negative. It means that the enemy is let loose again, because he's no longer captive, he's been freed. So anyway, Domas was very intrigued by that idea, and we got talking. We came inside here, and he said, well, can you explain something that's been puzzling me? Why here in this temple, where virtually everything is sandstone, except down in the crypt where there are a couple of registers of finer limestone that make it better for carving, for fine carving. Why here there are these roughly dressed granite drums under columns that are the rest of limestone, and everything else in this temple is limestone. Some symbolic reasons for there these granite drums. And I couldn't think of what it was at the time, and then later put two and two together, and in which there's a myth, a very famous myth concerning Sekhmet, and in fact it's a precessional myth in which the gods are old and weary, and humanity is no longer paying homage to them. And when you see that, it's the same thing happens in Ragnarok, the Norse myths of the death of the gods, and Wagner's Götterdämmerung. And that's a processional sign. At the end of a processional age, that's what happens. The forces that were in force have lost their power and their attraction, and mankind is disobedient. And in this case, in this myth, the gods Ra decides to avenge this disobedience by sending down Sekhmet, the lioness, to punish mankind. And so she comes down by day and comes down by night, by day, and slaughters everyone. And then by night comes down to drink the blood. And she goes at this with such enthusiasm that Ra and the gods have to figure out a way to stop her before she kills everybody. And interesting, and when this is seen astronomically, as it were, as a story about procession and the ages and the yugas and so on, it takes on more than an academic significance. So they consult Jehuti, principle of cosmic wisdom, and he devises a ruse in which the gods, I'm not sure who it is, it's the gods who do this, but they remove...
Jehuti poured the lake of
He
red
does it
wine.
himself. He removes the blood and replaces the blood with wine. with wine. And when Sekhmet comes down to drink the blood, she drinks the wine and becomes thoroughly soused and wakes up transformed into her domesticated form as Hathor. There is a relationship between them. So what I'm pretty sure this is paying homage to that transformation of Sekhmet into Hathor. And when we get to Philae, particularly at Philae, we'll see another instance where granite is left deliberately roughened, which is, it's still a firestone, but when it's roughened, in other words, it's wildfire, and when it's like this, it's domestic. The fire has been tamed, as it were, and turned to a domestic use. So anyway, it's a bit of interesting sort of symbolic architecture, as it were. And Tomas was no longer around for me to talk of. Anyway, I never saw him, and he died now. But I think he would have been pleased with that.
And by the way, it's very heavy kind of composite column, which is, it has the faces of Hathor and the composite fruits, and it's too much. It's heavy.
Yeah, that's a good point, Tyler. One of the things that makes this so different from Abydos is not just the inferior quality of the reliefs, but the sheer complexity of the execution, in which the columns are no longer, the capitals of the columns are no longer simple papyrus or lotus in flower or in bud, but kind of bundles, bouquets of all kinds of things, including all kinds of fruit and pomegranates and date palms, and the whole thing, even though it doesn't register, immediately on your own, sensibilities, especially since you're, it's the first time in Egypt for most of you, it registers subliminally, and you feel the complexity of everything as compared to the purity, especially of Abydos. One of the reasons why it's so interesting to do Abydos and Dendera in a day, and not just 2 Ptolemaic temples or 2 New Kingdom temples. So Continue.
Go to festival?
Lester?
John, I have a question.
Sure.
Why is Hathor becoming so prominent all of a sudden?
Well, this temple was consecrated to Hathor.
Sure, but we didn't see that type of prominence in temple.
In where?
In Abydos.
So we did that. Osiris was everywhere. He was the central figure. He was the central figure in virtually everything that we looked at.
Occurs later on, so I mean, this temple is quite a bit younger, right?
Well, yes,
Much
but
younger.
but it's built upon a much older temple. I mean, virtually all of the temples that we visit, with the exception of other symbols, which was holy, apparently holy, the creation of Ramses II, are built upon earlier and still earlier temples, and the chances are, if you go deep enough, you get to still more earlier things that happens in Mexico all the time. Anyway,
So this is like a later interpretation of Hathor.
well,
It
it's a way-
continued, actually.
it's a
It
way-
continued. It never died. And then it became elaborated more. ISIS too, as well,
It's
by the
not so
way.
much- It's not a later interpretation, it's a later representation. That's built upon still earlier, what's already established from time immemorial. And these are the two Hathor faces that inspired my friend Ronnie Bobrovsky with that brilliant observation that that's meant to be, that face is intended as a uterus, with the ears as ovaries, and I think in this one, even
It's
though
eggy.
my bad eyes can see it, you see the little egg in the ears? Well, that's formal as far as I'm concerned. No arguing. There's no arguing about that. And as you know, as mother of all, it's perfectly in keeping that that's the figuration that they're using, and deliberately, and that's why, as I was saying, my pal Brad Clausen is coming up with a whole study of sacred physiology, in which various pieces and parts of the human form, interior and external, are playing a role in the vast overall doctrine. Now in here, this is where the New Year is celebrated, or one of the places which it's celebrated, and you see above your head a very sort of clumsily drawn, but vivid and pretty good shape representation of Nut sky stretched above the temple itself. You see that there's a Hathor head in it there. That's the facade of the temple, and she is swallowing the sun in the evening. This is a thing you see often. Swallowing the sun in the evening and giving birth to the sun in the morning. And you see the rays of the sun coming down upon the face of Hathor. You see that her dress is made up of waves of energy, of water, but waves, the cosmic waters. And one of the things that's really interesting, I don't remember if it's my observation or if I got it from somebody else, I'm not sure. But you see the way that they portray sun rays. Now, you ask anybody to portray sun rays, ask a kid to draw sun rays in straight lines. And in fact, if artists are doing that, they're portraying sun rays in straight lines too. Here they're portraying them as papyrus, as a stream of papyrus flowers. The papyrus, as I've mentioned on several occasions, is the symbol of organic manifestation. Papyrus, it's the symbol of one of the sets of one of the many symbols of northern Egypt, of the growth and the organic world. But it raises an interesting question. It's a lot of trouble to sculpt in and portray sun rays as individual papyrus flowers. I mean, imagine the amount of difference
Like
that would
buckets.
make. And what I'm thinking is that it could well be that the Egyptians understood the quanta nature of light, that light comes to us in packets, not in the stream. Could well be. And I
Looks
forget.
like that clipped sine wave. That looks like the waveform. I forget the name of it, but it would be a sine wave that clips straight down at the end of it. Right? And
I
it's
don't know.
three-dimensional.
I'm not a physicist, but it could well be.
And John, what are the two mounds? Is it fire or two trees?
Where the
The two
temples
peaks. The two peaks that are.
Oh, those are the twin peaks of the horizon.
Yeah, but then there is what? Tree or fire?
Oh, there's a tree somewhere. There's a tree. Where is it?
Can I have that?
Yeah.
Flash for now.
Is there a
No,
significance of the
okay.
non-names of the
Flash is
sun?
good.
Yes, there is. Yeah.
What's here, John? These. Look, this.
Oh, yeah, right. Well, those are the, yes, of course, those are the organic forms arising from the twin peaks of manifestation. It's the peaks that are, effectively, the peaks are breasts, but in the cosmic sense, they're organic life streaming from the fertile mounds, as it were. And the nine rays, 9 is a number associated with pattern, the repetition of manifestation. So we'll see when we get to Karnak, there are 7 banks, uniquely 7 banks of 9 columns each in the hypostyle hall, which is consecrated to, which is a representation of the papyrus swamp of organic creation in which Horus is raised to manhood. So it all fits in. Sometimes you have to ballpark it, sometimes you be pretty precise about it. Another weird element here, which is common in Ptolemaic art, is you see that a lot of the cartouches are left empty. The usual explanation is that the Ptolemies were killing each other so rapidly that the priests didn't want to carve in the name of the reigning Ptolemy, only to have until the next one came along and removed it. But since the Ptolemies, with the exception of Cleopatra, never came ever themselves to Upper Egypt at all, and wouldn't have known the difference if they were there or not. And my own reckoning is that this is a sneaky way the priests had of
Disrespect?
of a saying. Actually, none of you guys are old enough to remember Mort Sahl.
No pharaoh.
And in 1960, told everybody to vote no and keep the White House empty another 8 years. And I think basically this is the Egyptian priesthood saying, no pharaoh, we don't accept. Not sure of that, but I think it's as good an explanation as any.
Is Upper Egypt southern?
They took the cask away.
I know, they're definitely going through.
Oh, shit. Okay, let me go in.
Oh, these are the.
This is the non-cathode ray tube. Right. Okay, come in, and everybody, and put your backs to this wall. Pack in really close. Somebody come through this way. Pack in really close.
One more here?
You can, yes. And a few.
Turn sideways.
And then they shut the door.
Trust each other.
Break it up.
I want an epidermal.
Zal, if you want, you
need
and
ice.
Haley, come in the front and just,
Because we're short.
and just pretend you're short.
Yeah, that's the eggplant, yeah.
Yeah, this is
The cathode ray
this is the
eggplant.
famous cathode ray tube that the unicorns insist is a cathode ray tube, and it does sort of look like a cathode ray tube. But the significance of this crypt, there are a whole bunch of other crypts, but they're not open to the public, and I've never been in them. But all kinds of the funerary equipment that would be used in the New Year's procession were stored in this most unlikely of storage spaces. And then on the appointed day, taken out, carried through up that incredibly constricted passage and into the temple, and then proceed on the way up where the celebration would take place. And actually, I always wondered, and this is another one of my people on my trip, brilliant observation, that this is where the New Year is celebrated, and this is the equipment that's in here that's going to be used in the celebration. So everybody knows this. And why should they make it next to impossible to get the stuff out? And somebody said, well, that's supposed to be the exit from the birth canal. I said, right. Right, brilliant. And anyhow, it's not a cathode ray tube. Because, one, if it were like the helicopter, you don't just conjure up a cathode ray tube. You have to have a very elaborate and developed technological society to do that. And if they had such a thing, you'd be finding evidence of it all over the place in some way, shape, or form, not necessarily the ray tube itself. But what this is the whole temple, as all the temples, is cosmological. So this is down here, this is the earliest stages, the birth of the universal process. And so what we're having here is an artist's, artistic way of representing the manifestation of the first vibration, the first ray form. And they use the lotus, very similar to Indian iconography. And you see the lotus flower, and it's got its roots along the floor of the water, and it's flowering in the air, and it's sending forth this sea serpent, a water snake, as in Shawla says, that represents the first wave form, and it's being supported by the jet column with the eggs. I mean, this is a hell of a cathode ray tube with arms extending through it, holding up the snake. And my interpretation of this is that eggplant-like form is the fragrance from the lotus flower. I mean, if you're an artist and you're told to draw a smell, how else would you do it? It has to be something of that nature.
Stink lines.
What? Yeah.
Stink lines.
Yeah, something of that sort. And then when the clincher is, and you notice the snake itself, it doesn't have any scales, and you see down there a bit, you see there's a falcon, the Horus falcon sitting on a plinth, on a stand, and the only thing that's finished in the falcon is the headdress. So that obviously deliberate, it's not effaced, and it's not done that way by any accident. And turn around and look at the companion piece on this wall.
Double.
Yeah, on this wall, and you see that one becomes two. The whole thing is doubled here. Here you have two lotuses, two eggplants. Here the jet column itself is holding up not the serpent, not the waveform. This could lend itself to another really interesting thesis by somebody. It's not going to be me, but holding up the envelope of fragrance, and now it's dual, and now the details on the waveform are filled in. Here you see the eyes and so on, and over there you see the falcon, and now it has all of its feathers beautifully portrayed, and its feet. But you see that the headdress is left unfinished. So it's a becoming in return situation. Of that you can be certain, but the details of it remain to be hammered out. And somewhere or another, somebody must have translated these Ptolemaic hieroglyphs. Ptolemaic hieroglyphs are a whole different ball of wax, actually. I mean, experts, it's sort of like a GP. A doctor, has a certain amount of training, but if he wants to be a neurosurgeon, he has to learn a whole new discipline on top of what he already knows. Ptolemaic hieroglyphs are sort of like that. But anyway, it's, as far as I'm concerned, the end of the cathode ray tube controversy, but very interesting. And also, this is the only limestone in the temple, because they needed it to do a finer, or they wanted it to be able to do a finer level of carving for these particularly significant cosmic events. Okay, shall we head off to the bricks now, to the open air?
Oh, super nice. Well, the good news is it was good cooler.
Hold on. Sort this out here. Okay. Now, we're just, wait, let me get up here a little bit.
They're coming.
Now, what you're looking at, what you see here is, wait, as we go up, what you're looking at is the actual procession of bringing all of the paraphernalia, the celebratory paraphernalia, up this winding staircase to the top, where it's going to be part of the New Year's Jubilee. And as always, what you see is what you got. This is what it would have been like. And by the way, when you come through, notice the little slits that will allow the light through, and the sun comes streaming through, again in packets of papyrus flowers, which is obviously a hell of a lot more work than just doing sun rays.
I bet you they use donkeys.
What?
I bet you they use donkeys. Those stairs are designed for animals.
Why?
Because they're flattened.
Well, I bet they didn't. Well, they'd have shown donkey. I'll bet they're flattened because they're carrying up a lot of heavy stuff.
Yeah, well, they want to be more manly, that's all.
Well, they're
Now-
probably shorter so they can control the number of them. Right? And one of the steps.
Suppose,
There is a wedding, and they're parading with the music around with the brass and the furniture to show everyone.
We're gonna go through that birth canal?
Eventually.
Now supposedly, and I'm not sure where I got the information from when I was doing the guidebook, because I don't 100% trust it. It seems not quite right. That this is where the procession ended up, and on the appointed day, whatever that was, I think July 22nd or something like that, with the birth of the new year, the priests are going to raise a statue of Hathor, golden statue of Hathor, naked, stripped from her from her clothing, which would have been purchased at Victoria's Secret to begin with.
So the people can see it up. Remember, we used to go up.
Yeah, but I'm not sure. My understanding was that they
Music.
raised it from here, but that doesn't make sense really.
Yeah, the music
Anyway,
here.
the people would be assembled down below, and the goddess would make her appearance,
Shine.
and everybody would shout and scream. And it's sort of a much cooler version of the bouncing ball and in Times Square, but it's kind of the same idea. A signal that now there's a new year and what's in store. Well, a lot of crummy stuff actually right now, but anyway, so I've been told that this is where it happened, but I don't trust that. Anyway, it happened somewhere.
It happened on top.
How do you know?
Because the people have the courtyard and the outside, and then it's golden, so with the rising sun, it will shine. And
Well,
it's exactly like in Horus also
But
in
I
Hathor.
didn't invent that. I mean, I didn't make that up. Some book.
It's okay, because this was a music stand. That's to,
Oh, maybe.
yeah, that's the music.
Let's see. Ooh, look, I got that. Got off.
Oh, really? Really? Why?
No.
Let's show them the wall. The mud brick.
Yeah.
This is the best green.
Yeah, that's nice.
Do you know how much of the temple is missing?
None.
Oh, okay, what is...
Almost none.
Where's that ramp go to?
Oh, well, that would have gone up to, a parapet that goes around and goes up to the, it would have been like this. You see, it would have gone up to a big wide ledge.
Okay.
And they used to be able to get up there and
Yeah.
look down.
So there's...
But, I don't know, somebody stupid idiot fell off or something like that and they closed it down. Anyway, here, this is a good place to get a beat on it. These are giant enclosure walls that went around every
Temple?
that went around every temple, and this served a dual purpose, that they separated the secular world on the outside from the sacred precincts on the inside, and they also had a practical function that when flood time came and the land was flooded, these are really thick walls, they're 30, 40 feet thick, and if you look carefully you'll see that they themselves are laid down in wavy courses like this, simulating the symbol for water, and of course the mud itself is earth, so they're earth and water mixed, put to a practical use, and you see that they're still in pretty recognizable shape
Wavy.
over 2,000 years later. And down below there, where's the sacred lake? See it?
And it's on
It's
this
on the other
side.
side, isn't it? Oh well, anyway,
Oasis.
nothing to see. They call the
Yeah.
oasis.
Can't see it.
We can. When we finish
Yeah,
this
we'll have
wall.
to see it because we can't go down the other way. We got that shut off.
Stop, let's see. Let's go to this room.
Anyway, this is the Zodiac in here. Did everyone get to the Zodiac?
بتسيب البتاع وتطلع انت معانا بقى. طب حلو. جميل. يا حرام غسلوهم. يا لهوي. She came to the watching it.
Except for Zoe.
Not Zoe. Carlos maybe.
Yes, probably.
Is the ceiling black on purpose, or did it get that?
No, the ceiling, well, there's an interesting story behind that. That it, like, who's got a good flashlight? I left mine in my jacket collar, of course. Thank you. Okay. So this is the famous Dendera Zodiac. And as you see, it's all blackened with smoke, like the ceilings of much of the rest of the temple. But what actually happened, this is a replica. The actual Zodiac in one big block that weighed 35 tons was extracted off the temple, was taken out of the temple by some early adventurer whose name I forget. And somehow, because even then it was illegal to do such a thing, somehow evading the police, the local police, loaded it onto a boat and expected to sell it for lots of money to antiquarians in England. But the antiquarians, it's a 35-ton block. The English weren't the least bit interested in this stupid Zodiac. So he managed to pawn it off on the French. I don't know for how much. It's a funny story told in delicious detail in a book called, a very good friend of mine, a wonderful writer named Paul William Roberts, a book called River in the Desert, and of adventures in modern Egypt, stuff that you won't find elsewhere. And anyway, he got it to France, and the French took it, and now it's proudly a part of the Louvre. But what happened was that when they realized that they could, I think this is the case, they realized that they could now use special solvents and clean up the Zodiac. I believe that's been done with the Prince Zodiac, but the French, as a sop to the Egyptians, gave them a replica some time ago, it's many years, decades ago. And of course, in keeping with the original, they blackened it, painted it all over, but it's not the original underneath it. So the Egyptians are stuck with the smoke-blackened Zodiac. Well, the French have the real article, which is now restored, so I'm told. Anyway, that's a funny story. And then there's all kinds of information encoded in this, and lots of people, it's almost like people going after the secrets of the Great Pyramid. I mean, no month goes by when somebody hasn't supposedly cracked the code with these fantastic, elaborate, and some of them may be right, I just don't have time to go into and nor have the expertise to judge all of them. But so in this case,
Tauret here plays the central pole,
and
yani.
Tauret
Where
is the hippopotamus.
Oh, here, standing upright. So that's the pole,
That's Tauret, yeah, that's
and then it all goes
the
around
polar
like
axis,
this.
yeah, it goes in a spiral rather than a circle.
And here is
And
a
there's-
Big Dipper, yeah?
The foreleg is a bull, yeah, and then the
The
signs
leg.
of the zodiac, yeah.
And the Cancer, look here, John.
Yeah, there's Cancer, the crab.
And Leo
And
and
anyway, they're all there, but
Pisces.
in a very irregular pattern. And the weeks of the month, the weeks of the year are
where?
around the perimeter of
Here.
the circle, but irregularly. So why should that be? There are actually real secrets, because all of this has to have been deliberate. And there are, for sure, real secrets encoded within this Schraller because of the positioning of certain of the figures. I'm not exactly sure which, but I think it's some of these figures that are holding up,
Horus.
holding things up. And because of the way that they're positioned, this part of the temple was built in whatever it was, 50, 60 BC. But because of the way, the positioning of the zodiac within, it's not the zodiac of 60 or 70 BC. According to Schraller, it's half a, I think he says it's half a, 1.5 or a half of a precessional year earlier than that. In other words, a few thousand years before that, the various configurations within the zodiac would have been accurate, and they were no longer accurate when the actual zodiac was done. So more mysteries for other
Yeah.
people than me to
Let's
figure
go
out.
to the church.
And let's
because
go
they're
now,
shutting.
we're sort of closing out with a few more cool things to do.
Thank you.
Seen something that comes along later in the game.
And the weather, you know.
Oh, that is meant to have, you know, to piggyback on top of everything.
That's John.
That's one of the interesting things about the traditional Egyptologist point of
Maybe
view.
I take a picture.
Apparently, Egypt history starts with apex and declines every year thereafter.
Yeah, they don't. Yeah, the most advanced. The beginning is perfect for
I did.
languages.
Yeah, and the one. Yeah.
Deities are established.
Because I see something in him, in you.
And then you're in Mexico and the same thing is true for Mayans.
Yeah.
And,
Those shoes are really okay to be in all day?
Yeah.
I mean, they were comfortable in terms of lights and
Yeah.
walking on stones and stuff.
It's cushion, you know, it's the soles. Yes.
Anyway, this is, right, we all here? Anybody behind these? No. Yes. You all here? No, they keep coming. So this is an early Coptic church or monastery. I'm not sure which, but anyway.
No, that's
church.
the church.
That's the church.
It became a church.
Yeah, well,
Became.
but it's been made from cannibalized blocks cannibalized from
Around the temple.
from around the temple. And what's interesting here is that you see here the traditional what's that shell? Scallop shell that you always see in Venus rising in Renaissance paintings and so on. And in this case, the ankh, in the process of becoming the Christian cross, you know, recognized as such by the early Christians, and no problem. In other words, not opposed to the notion of the roots of Christianity associated with the ancient doctrine, with the iconography. That's the scallop shell plays no part in ancient Egypt, as it were, and the little ankh there is not the look of a regular you know, of a regular Egyptian ankh. And in the Coptic Museum, actually, in Cairo, there's a very interesting relief of such an ankh. Unfortunately, I'm terrible at drawing, but it looks something like this. The head is like this, and then see what I say? And then the body comes out like this, but the arms come out like this. So it looks like, voila, an angel. And I've always wondered where they got these little angels from for chocolate boxes and so on. And it may be, I wouldn't want to go to the stake of this, that it is actually derived from the ankh, from a highly stylized ankh, meaning the angel is
Living.
is the spirit of life itself. Could be. Anyway,
And here
it's
you
very
see
good.
that they put a real cross, a true cross in
Yeah,
here,
there's a true cross.
where there is also the St. Michael inside, the eagle.
The eagle, replaces the falcon.
This is a 4th century
Fourth
church, and we'll talk about Copt all together in
Is
one
that a
time.
Coptic cross?
This is a cross,
Byzantine.
true cross. Well,
Oh, true cross. That's
although it has wide edges,
yeah.
so maybe
Well,
it's a
that's
Coptic
valid.
one. Can't
Yeah.
tell. All right,
Okay.
let's
so
let's go. Each one on one side. Yalla.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, it's part of the charm and the good.
Yes, right.
Thank you.
Okay, this little guy, this little figure here is called Bes, B-E-S. Probably derives, it shows up in around the Middle Kingdom, or New Kingdom, and not before then, and is associated, may be derived, they always say that he's an African dwarf. But he didn't look African, he looks Asian actually, and there's one of the Hindu gods is called Bet, and plays the same role as Bes, so it's probably that the one is derived from the other, and he is associated with childbirth and with music and song and so on, and becomes very popular in the later kingdoms of Egypt, and as an amulet, becomes a very popular amulet, which you can sometimes find modern versions of. And he's pretty cool, and he's always shown, you see, definitely as a dwarf, and wearing his cheetah-headed ceremonial robe with the bull's tail dangling behind. And here you don't see it that clearly, but he's sticking his tongue out like this. And on one of my trips, there was a nurse who taught the Lamaze method, and she said that's a yoga posture, isn't it, Celesta? The lion.
the
isn't it?
lion
That's the lion, isn't it?
posture.
Oh, really?
And
Yeah.
apparently, according to the nurse, when you're doing that, if you're having contractions, woman having contractions, it helps release the contractions and ease the birth. So associated in that way. When we get to Philae Temple, we'll see some other cool Bes figures. And I learned way late, I mean, decades after I left Ibiza, that Ibiza itself is actually named after Bes, Ebusas in Catalan. So I thought that was rather cool. I spent all that time on an island named after an Egyptian god. I kind of like that. Okay, let's go. Back to the bus.